Chapter 10. "This wig itches," Josh complained. He, Dink, and Ruth Rose were hiding behind the desk in the hotel lobby. Josh was dressed as the ghost, complete with wig, robe, and makeup. "It won't be long now," Dink said, glancing at the clock. It was almost noon. "Each Rail and Rook had better hurry up," Josh said. "I'm going to suffocate in this dumb dress." From where he was hiding, Dink could see the rest of the lobby. Mr. Linkletter was sitting on the sofa with his aunt and uncle. On the other side of the lobby, Mr. and Mrs. Jeffers were playing cards with Linda Gomez, the reporter from the Green Lawn Gazette. Next to her sat a man with a camera. "What if they don't come?" Ruth Rose whispered. Dink smiled and pointed at the front door. "I think they just did." 3 men walked into the lobby. One was tall, one was medium, and one was short and round. Each was dressed in a dark suit, white shirt, and blue tie. "They look like 3 penguins," Josh said. Mr. Linkletter hurried over to the men, then led them back to his aunt and uncle. The tall man shook hands with Mr. Spivets. "I am Fletcher Each," he said. "I am Randolph Rail," the medium-sized man said, sticking out his hand. "And I am Miles Rook," the short man said, shaking hands in turn. Mr. Spivets nodded at the men. "Have you brought the papers?" he asked. Fletcher Each beamed. "We certainly have," he said. He handed Mr. Spivets an important-looking document. Randolph Rail removed an envelope from his briefcase. "And here's the check." Miles Rook whipped a gold pen out of his pocket. "All we need is your signature, Mr. Spivets," he said. Mr. Spivets looked sadly at his wife. Then he took the pen and started to sign the document. Just then, Mr. and Mrs. Jeffers walked up. "Look, Todd," Mrs. Jeffers said. "It's the movie producers." "What a surprise," her husband said. "We were just talking about the movie you're going to film here in the hotel." Mr. Spivets paused. "What's this about a movie?" he asked suspiciously. Began Fletcher Each. "Well," started Randolph Rail. We can explain," said Miles Rook. "There's no need to explain," said Linda Gomez. She stood up and walked toward the men. "I'm a reporter from the Green Lawn Gazette. Tomorrow my column will tell the whole town how you tried to trick these people into selling their hotel." The 3 men stared at Linda, then at the Jefferses. Finally, their eyes landed on Mr. and Mrs. Spivets. Fletcher Each turned pink. Randolph Rail went white. Miles Rook turned purple. There was dead silence in the Shangri-La lobby. And then a ghost in a spiky white wig floated up from behind the desk. "Go home," it moaned in a creepy voice. "Go home before it's too late." Everyone in the lobby except Each, Rail, and Rook started to laugh. "I guess I won't be needing this," Mr. Spivets said. He ripped the document he was holding into pieces. What are you doing?" Fletcher Each spluttered. "You agreed to sell this hotel," Randolph Rail said. "You can't back out of a deal with Each, Rail, and Rook," said Miles Rook. Mrs. Spivets stood up next to her husband. "Each, Rail, and Rook," she said. "You should rearrange the letters in your names to Cheat, Liar, and Crook." "And now," Mr. Spivets said, "I think it's time for you gentlemen to leave." Without another word, Mr. Linkletter escorted the 3 men to the front door. The man with the camera followed, snapping one picture after another. Everyone cheered. Flo Spivets cheered the loudest. Mrs. Jeffers turned back to Mr. and Mrs. Spivets. "My husband and I are so sorry for what we did," she said. "Can you ever forgive us?" "Of course we can, dear," Mrs. Spivets said. "In fact," said Mr. Spivets, "you were such good ghosts, we'd like to invite you to do it again. 1 weekend a month, we'd like you to put on Shangri-La Mystery for our guests. What do you think?" "That's a great idea," Mr. Jeffers said. "We can get some of our actor friends to help." The photographer snapped pictures of the Jeffersons and the Spivitzes. "Wait till my readers hear about this," Linda Gomez said, writing it all down on her pad. Then Mr. Spivets turned to Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose. "And speaking of mysteries, I want to thank our 3 super sleuths." He pulled 3 envelopes out of his pocket. "From the bottom of our hearts, Mrs. Spivets and I thank you," he said. He handed the envelopes to the kids. "Please open these before you go to bed." The photographer snapped a picture as the kids blushed. "Be sure to mention their names in the column," Mrs. Spivets said to Linda Gomez. "My pleasure," Linda said. "Now how about a few more pictures of the 3 kids?" Dink and Ruth Rose looked into the camera and smiled. "Wait," Josh said, struggling out of the ghost costume. "I don't want my picture in the paper with this wig and dress on." Later that night the kids met in Dink's living room. Dink was holding Loretta in his lap. She was nibbling on one of his shirt buttons. Josh pulled out the envelope Mr. Spivets had given him. "Can we open these now?" he asked. "He said before we go to bed, Josh," Dink said. "This is before we go to bed." "Josh is right," Ruth Rose said. "I'm dying to know what's in mine. Let's open them on the count of 3, okay? 1, 2, 3. "Oh, golly, my great Aunt Molly," Josh said. 3 plane tickets to Florida. Ruth Rose held up the contents of her envelope. "And 3 passes to Disney World." Dink gulped when he saw what was in his envelope. He pulled out 3 $50 bills and a note. "Thank you for saving our hotel and solving another Shangri-La mystery. Say hi to Mickey and Goofy for us. Much gratitude, Ebb and Flo Spivets." Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose jumped up and did a triple high five. Loretta crawled off the sofa. No one was looking, so she started chewing one of the $50 bills.